Alright, so the next thing we'll be looking at is the I in refined analysis. And we know the I stands for interest coverage, and we want the interest coverage to be greater than 4, and it's really good if it's greater than 10. So what does interest coverage actually mean? So every time you take a loan from the bank, in order for the bank to make money, you pay some extra amount of money back, and this extra amount of money is called interest. So if you take a loan of $100, when you pay the loan back, you have to pay $5 a year until you pay the $100 back. And that $5 a year is called the interest. So if company A has made $10 and company B has made $15, we can see that company B has a higher interest coverage. It has an interest coverage of 3 because it can pay those $5 for 3 years, but company A can pay a $5 for 2 years. So the higher the interest coverage, the better. But on top of interest coverage, you can also do this thing called debt to equity. So you can use more interest coverage, or you can use debt. So because we went through interest coverage during the class, I'll basically covering debt to equity during this lesson. So when a company takes on loans, it has to pay interest on the debt, and we want to make sure that the company has sufficient earnings to cover the interest that it owes on its debt. So a low debt to equity, we want our debt to equity to be low, and we want it to be below 0.5. So debt to equity, debt is very bad, and it can be very disastrous to a business, especially in bad times such as COVID. And the debt to equity ratio basically shows that whether the company has enough money to pay off their debt. So how to calculate debt to equity is quite simple. It's just the total debt of a company divided by the total equity of a company. So here we can see this debt to equity. So remember previously, before we had the total equity, that shareholders equity thing that we calculated. So here the total equity of the company will be $50, and let's say it has $100 of debt. So once again, you divide debt to equity and you get the debt to equity of 2. So we can see that the debt to equity ratio is 2.0, and this is much greater than what we want it to be of 0.5. So here's another example. So here's what else we can look at. So here we can take a business that has a very high to debt to equity, like we saw, where it had a debt to equity of 2. And anytime there's a business downturn or COVID such as this, the debt basically crushes the business. However, if the company has a low debt to equity, so here we have a debt of $25 and the total equity of $50, here you can see the debt to equity is 0.5 or 50%. And this is a very good debt to equity because it basically shows that the company can basically pay off all of its debt anytime there's a business downturn or this COVID thing that we had. So a lot of companies with a high amount of debt have struggled a lot during this COVID time period, and companies with lower amount of debt, most commonly tech companies, have kind of boosted during this because they don't really fall back because they have to keep paying money back to the bank. So here a 0.5 debt to equity is very good. So just a note, the debt to equity is not applicable to banks because the business model of banks is literally to have more and more debt because that is how they make money. As I talked about that interest coverage, where the banks make money, the more interest they receive, and the more interest received basically means that they have more debt. So the debt to equity ratio is not applicable to banks. However, if you really just want to have a test on it, you can still fail it on the debt to equity criteria. But just understand that banks generally have a very high debt to equity, and you don't really need to worry about that. So how would we find the debt to equity ratio on Morningstar? So we've covered everything else during the boot camp. So how would we find the debt to equity? So we all know key ratios, full key ratios data, and here in the Morningstar thing. So as we all know, the interest coverage can be found at the bottom, and here we can see Facebook has no interest coverage. But to find the debt, we go to key ratios, and then here we go to financial health, and at the bottom it should once again show the debt to equity ratio. So here we can see Facebook has a debt to equity ratio of 0.09, which is much better than what we want of 0.5. So this is basically how to calculate debt to equity and what it means, and how it can be used or calculated. Thank you.